Hey there my Battlefield friends and fans, and welcome back to Battlefield Hardline. I wanted to post this heist match because it was classic, almost like out of a movie. It was so intense and so action-packed. I just had so much fun. But while we're watching this, I wanted to talk about a subject, something I wanted to do for a while now. When I grew up, I didn't know about nerds and geeks. But as a kid, I would probably have been considered a nerd because I loved reading comics books. In fact, I had a huge collection of comic magazines and books. Interestingly, my parents weren't into comics at all, but my dad happened to have a friend that was also a neighbor, and this guy lent his comic book collection to me. It was a huge collection, so I had lots and lots to read. And in addition, I bought my own comics whenever I got some pocket money. I was never interested in comics with superheroes or sci-fi, more like into adventure stories and just funny stories. And I was also big into drawing, and so eventually it didn't take long for me to actually make my own comic books. So I made 2 comic books. And I never got them published because back then there was no internet and that would have been very complicated and very expensive. So when I became a teen, I swapped comic books into actual books and I started to read a lot. And I gave all my comic books away. So was this the end of my nerdiness? Well, no, because I also liked handheld games, and anybody who was into digital games back then was considered a nerd. However, the handheld games back then were very primitive, and therefore I wasn't using them much, mainly when I was bored waiting somewhere. Books were still my main passion. What really got me hooked into actual gaming was a game called Thunderblade, which I discovered at a local game center. You had to be 18 in order to enter the game center. I had just turned 18. Ever since then, I never ever forgot about that game, which was so different from anything else because instead of the typical side-scrolling, you actually were able to get that 3D feeling. In that game, you have to fly a helicopter through war areas while trying to avoid being shot down by tankers, cannons, and soldiers. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I'm pretty sure that Thunderblade is the reason I'm such a huge Battlefield fan nowadays. A couple of years later, a friend and I were buying our first gaming computer, which came with a huge joystick and the games were on huge floppy disk. Everything was huge back then, huh? We played tons of games ranging from adventure to horror to sports, just trying out everything. People who knew about our gaming passion shook their heads, thinking that we are real nerds. I then had a long break in gaming, focusing on my career and other hobbies, like art and making music. The gaming world developed and consoles arrived unnoticed by me. Years later, on a trip to Las Vegas, we visited one of the gaming centers in one of the hotels, and I fell in love with the game Crazy Taxi. I loved it so much that I couldn't forget about it once I got home. When I did some research, I found out that I could actually play this game at home if I bought a Dreamcast console. I was stoked. It didn't take long for me to visit one of the closest Best Buys and get my hands on a Dreamcast console. So that's when gaming really took off for me. I played like 100 different games on the Dreamcast, and then Xbox came along. Games got better and better, and I realized that I mostly enjoyed action games where I could shoot things. All of a sudden, gamers became mainstream. Consoles really opened up gaming to everyone. No longer did you have to know about computers and shed out a bunch of money, but now you could enjoy great games on your TV with a click of a button. So a gamer was no longer a nerd. And that's when we started to hear more and more about geeks versus nerds. So what's the difference between a nerd and a geek today? A typical nerd today is most likely a person who is into superheroes, comics, action figures, anything Star Wars related, and into any of the more unrealistic sci-fi shows on TV, dressing up in costumes of superheroes and gaming characters and so forth. You get the picture. A typical geek is someone who loves gadgets, new technology, coding, websites, new digital trends, design, and is usually having a career in one of these. And that's exactly the category I fall into. However, it is apparent that a lot of people still don't know the difference. And why that doesn't seem to matter to a lot of people, it is important to us geeks and nerds, because if, for example, I want to follow geek news on the internet, I get bombarded with nerd news I have no interest in. For example, I have absolutely no interest in anything Star Wars related, yet I constantly have to read about it in all my geek news. It would be nice that if you're looking for geek news, you would only get geek news. But I guess that will always be an issue, as there are indeed people who fall into both categories, and therefore the two categories constantly get mixed together. And with that, we geeks have to put up with news we're not interested in. So it would be better if there were geek-only related news and nerd-only related news, and if someone falls into both categories, they can just follow both news, but it would not be so mixed together that a lot of times either party gets news that they're absolutely not interested in, and that happens every day and over and over. So anyway, how do you feel about this? What are your experiences? Do you consider yourself more of a geek or more of a nerd? Or do you belong in both categories, or are you not sure? Are you offended if you are called either, or are you proud? I would love to hear from you. Leave me a comment and or a like. Much appreciated. So enough about this subject. I hope I didn't bore you with it, but since you are a gamer, most likely I would assume you probably will have thought about this eventually, or you're thinking about this all the time, or you have run into the same thoughts and issues, and maybe this is of interest to you. So I'm just trying to discuss things that are going through my mind. And you know, while I like to put a lot of my thoughts into my music, sometimes it's hard to put thoughts into music, and it's easier to kind of just talk about it in a video. And there's no better place than like a gaming video like this, and especially if it's a fun match like this. Oh my god, this match was just so amazing. And as you can see, I'm not really a fan of playing the medic, as you know if you've been following me for a while, because I always feel like the medic class has so little to defend himself, herself, against, you know, vehicles. There's really nothing you can do against vehicles besides here, you know, you throw 2 Molotovs and hopefully the vehicle stays put, doesn't drive away, and you can get the kill. But you don't really have much, and maybe you can get a battle pickup. Yes, that's probably what you're gonna say. But I feel like I'm super helpless. But because, you know, I've played so much of the other classes that I was just thinking, okay, I'm gonna give this class a little bit of a chance just to mix it up a bit and see, you know, how the guns perform and all. And I'm still a huge fan of the SG553, which I'm using here. I have to say that gun is, to me, it feels a lot better than like the other 2 popular assault rifles, the M416 and the M16, for some reason. So I don't know. I made a video about this a little while ago, and I don't know, people seem to use the M16 still a lot, and I just don't like it as much. But I hope you enjoyed this little heist action, and I hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.